Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You know how this starts. I'm using a different light today that looks too orange for me in person, but it looks really good on camera, or at least it does from what I can see on my screen, so I hope this video turns out well and I don't end up scrapping the whole thing because I don't like the lighting. But today I'm here to talk to you about things much more important than my lighting. So, as we all may or may not know, I recently finished my microbiology and biochemistry degree. The certificate is probably still going to be in the mail for months, but in my final year I had to take virology and immunology. And if you don't know what that means I had to learn a lot about viruses and even more about how vaccines work. And considering everything that's happening in life these days, I figured talking about vaccines would be a random topic that no one can see coming. Thought I'd spice it up a bit like that. So, what is a vaccine? Well, nobody knows for sure, but not in a bad way. It's just there are so many different forms of vaccines that there has yet to be an adequate definition that satisfied everybody. And because of that, you have all these different options. But in short, a vaccine is something that you can use to make yourself immune or resistant to a disease. And that can be an injection, the type we all know and love. But you also get oral vaccination that's often used on animals. An example would be the rabies vaccine. So they put this vaccine in something edible, go put it in the wild, and then animals will eat it, and the animals don't get rabies because they've been vaccinated. It's not too common, but you can take certain vaccinations as a pill. A vaccination can be something you eat, it can be something you drink, it can be something you sniff up, it can be something you inject. Any way it gets in your body. And that's why every time I see a meme saying we should just put the vaccine in jewel pods and then everyone would take it, I'm like, technically we can try and figure out a way to do that. Might not be the most effective or cost-effective way, but it's not impossible. But now I'm just going off on tangents, so let me explain to you the basic concept of a vaccine. A vaccine can be anything that you get in your system that results in you being immune to a disease or resistant to it. And a very generalized, dumbed down version of how a vaccine works is it is something that is either the disease-causing agent, something that comes from the disease-causing agent, or something that looks a lot like it, that is then introduced into your system where it can interact with antibodies. And well, a bunch of other cells and parts of the immune system, there is a lot to immunology, but basically your immune system that's running around in your blood gets to see this thing and goes, dude, what is that? And then it pokes at it and it prods at it and it tries different tools, if I can say, to see what works to deactivate or get rid of this new thing that does not identify as self. Because you don't want anything in you that isn't a part of you, so when there's something new, your body's like, what is that? We need to find out what it is and we need to get rid of it. And then when it finds something that works, it writes that down to remember it for next time it sees the same thing. It can be like, oh yeah, that thing worked. Let me go get it again. And that is what happens when you get sick with something. Your body sees this pathogen, goes, what is that? Tries to get rid of it, and then remembers the tool it used. The tool being a specifically shaped antibody that's created through recombination, which is very complicated. I did not enjoy that part of my semester. Now, if your body is doing this while you are infected with a pathogen, you might get sick and then you're dealing with symptoms and you're trying to protect yourself while your body is trying to figure out what to do. Where if it's a vaccine, the thing you're injected with can't make you sick. It's designed that way. So your body can try and figure out what to do with it without actually going through the symptoms of being sick. Now, mind you, the point of a vaccine is to stimulate the same immune response that would take place if you were actually infected with a real deal. Because that's how you get immunity. You have to have a test run where all the systems are actually working for your body to remember the second time. And because you are actually fighting off an infection that's not really going to do anything to you, you might get some swelling, some redness, some soreness where you did get the injection. Doesn't mean you're allergic to it, doesn't mean anything's wrong, it just means your body's reacting the way it should to create that memory to protect you next time. Now you might be wondering, how did we figure all this out? How did we get to this point? Well, after browsing my notes, I put together a little timeline for you guys so you can understand how privileged we are to have today's vaccines and not what we started with. So, way back in the day, as in 1430 BC Athens, that type of way back in the day, there was a plague that we still don't really know exactly what caused it. There are like a bunch of theories, but there was a plague, lots of people died, it wasn't a fun time. And then this one guy realized that the people who were capable of nursing the sick and who didn't just get sick themselves were the people who had already recovered from the disease once. So the connection between exposure and immunity was made back in 430 BC. Even though we were a long way from realizing the molecules involved and that your body had to be exposed to remember exactly how it works and yada yada yada. That molecular biochemistry came much later. But by the 10th century in India and China, they'd kind of figured out this concept enough to the point that they could use it to their advantage. Now if you're a little queasy and you don't like hearing gross things, you should skip like 10 seconds ahead. But what the people did back in the day is if you had smallpox, you got like a lot of scabs from it, because the pox would pop and then they'd make scabs and you'd look pretty gross. But they would take these scabs from sick people, they would dry them out, grind it up into a fine little powder, and then they'd have people inhale that powder, because by doing so, they then became immune to smallpox, which was a devastating disease and they needed a way to be immune to it. But the idea of having to sniff someone else's ground up scabs to get that really doesn't spark joy. This, believe it or not, was actually something called variolation, which is basically a very primitive type of vaccination. But then in 1796, along came Edward Jenner, which honestly is a name I am never ever going to forget, because the first time I heard it, my mind immediately went to Edward from Twilight and Jenner as in Kylie Jenner. And I thought to myself, that is not a good name to have in today's times because it just means different stuff to us. Back then it was probably just a normal name. But for that reason, I'll never forget his name. And what he realized is that being exposed to cowpox makes you immune to smallpox. And he picked this up when he was like a teenager, a tween. He was doing some kind of internship on a farm. He saw the milkmaids never got sick with smallpox, and I think he asked one of them about it, and they were like, no, I won't get smallpox. I already had cowpox. I'm fine. And cowpox was pretty much the same thing. It was just a little bit less intense. So you didn't die, you still got a little sick, but you weren't that bad off. But it was a lot better than smallpox, and then afterwards you didn't get smallpox. And obviously the milkmaids got this by working with the cows. So here he made two very important connections. Number one, you can get immunity for one thing by being infected by something very similar. And two, he realized that immunity can be passed on from person to person. It wasn't an innate quality of you to be immune, it can be cultivated in different people. And then this man did some very gross testing. It was, he took some pus. You should probably skip again, just warning you. He took some pus from someone that had cowpox and he injected it into like an 8-year-old boy to see what would happen. The kid got like a mild fever and lost his appetite or something like that for a day, and then he was fine. He didn't get cowpox. And then about a month later, he injected the same boy with pus from smallpox. And surprise, surprise, the kid miraculously survived. He didn't get sick or anything, and they were like, aha, we can do this. And like even back then, people were skeptical of this. There were comics and stuff of how you're gonna turn into a cow if you get injected with cowpox, and vaccines are gonna change what's inside of you and stuff like that. So anti-vax people really aren't anything new. They now just have Facebook as a platform to talk about it. But another famous guy called Louis Pasteur, the guy responsible for the milk now in your fridge because he made it safe for you to keep it there, he lived in the 1800s, and he both expanded and formalized vaccines. He gave us the first rabies vaccine, the first anthrax vaccine, and the first chicken cholera vaccine, because you gotta keep them chickens healthy too. So yeah, we've come a long way from basically licking the sick to protect ourselves to just getting a sterile little needle and then you're good to go. Which brings me to my next point of the different type of vaccines there are. And I feel if you hear this, number one, you'll understand how they work. And number two, it'll help you see where misconceptions come from. And then you'll be like, oh, okay, I see why you're thinking that, but this is why it's not true. I hope that's the case. We used to use live attenuated vaccines, and we really don't use them anymore because they have risks involved. But basically, they would take a disease and then they would weaken it. And then they'd give this weakened version to you. So you're still exposed to the pathogen, but it doesn't actually make you sick. And then you have your immunity. But they were still technically injecting you with a live pathogen, and it always came with a risk that this pathogen can revert back to its normal form, and then it's actually dangerous to inject people with it. So we stopped doing that. If you're wondering how they weaken viruses, they would do something like give it to bunnies, and the bunny would get sick, and then the pathogen be a bit weaker because it didn't need to be that intense to survive in a bunny. So they'd give it to like 10 different bunnies from the one to the other, so it gets weaker, and then put it back into people. But before you feel too bad for the bunnies, we don't do that anymore. We also used to do inactivated vaccines, where they take the pathogen, which, this is probably very late to mention it, but a pathogen is something that makes you sick. They take it, they disable it by exposing it to UV, cooking it, something like that, so that it don't work no more. And then they basically inject you with this dead pathogen. Now this also isn't great, doesn't work that well. And the reason for this is in the process of deactivating the pathogen, you change it a little bit. So it doesn't look exactly like the real McCoy. So when your body sees it again, it's like, it's familiar, but I'm not sure. So your immune response isn't that strong versus if your body recognized it immediately because it's seen that exact thing before. Are those wings gonna be even? They're never even. Then you get a subunit vaccine, which is very popular today and is where you take a subunit of the pathogen. So basically one of the dozens of little blocks you have to have a full pathogen. They just take like one of them and then they inject you with that. And then your body sees this one thing and goes, okay, I'll remember you. And the next time when you actually have the pathogen in you, it'll recognize this one part of it and then attack that. It's safe because this little piece on its own can't infect you at all. It doesn't have all the machinery. And it's also very easy for us to make because we can make these individual little pieces ourselves. Or we can isolate it from the pathogen and then we can be like, cool, this is what it looks like, see which part works best because some pieces create a stronger immune response than others. And then once we know what piece works, we can then create that piece ourselves and then make vaccines. That's how we can mass produce vaccines. And we don't need no bunny to do that. I believe this is a type of vaccine that is used for the flu, but I stand to be corrected. I'm not sure. Then you get toxoid vaccines, which are a lot of fun. Depending on the bacteria you get infected with, sometimes it releases toxins in your system, and these toxins are what makes you sick. For example, food poisoning is because there's a bacteria in you releasing toxins, little pieces of poison inside of you. And this toxin spreads quicker than the bacterium itself. So if you can inject someone with like a tiny bit of the poison, like so little bit that they won't feel any effects of it, but your body can still have a look at it, your immune system can learn to detect that toxin, and then it can fight off the toxin quickly so you don't actually experience the symptoms of, well, its toxicity. This effectively renders the bacterium harmless because it can't hurt you anymore, and then your body can safely just clean it out. And then for the last two type of vaccines, I want to look at you and make sure you understand what I'm saying, because this is the part that freaks people out. You get DNA vaccines and you get recombinant vector vaccines. Both are pretty new stuff. And I think potentially, again, don't quote me on this because I might be wrong, I think one of the COVID vaccines is a recombinant vector vaccine. But a DNA vaccine is where you are injected with a little piece of DNA originating from the pathogen. This DNA does not enter your genome. It doesn't become a part of your DNA. It doesn't change your DNA at all. On the contrary, it actually gets broken down. I know I'm grossly oversimplifying things, but I want to get the idea across to you. This DNA does nothing to your DNA. It doesn't code for anything dangerous in your system. And then this piece goes into your cell, right? But not into your nucleus, where your DNA is. It's in the cytosol around it, where there's a lot of mRNA and stuff moving around, just by the way. This is where proteins are being made, RNA is being broken down, stuff like that. So what happens is that little bit gets transcribed, and then your cell DIYs a piece of the pathogen. So instead of isolating it or making it outside and then kind of storing it and preventing it from breaking down due to temperature, time, stuff like that, you pretty much just give your body the recipe for one of the building blocks of the pathogen. Then it builds it itself inside your cell, and then your cell sees this is something new. So it takes it out on an MHC complex, which is pretty much just a protein, and goes, hey, immune system, I found this. What is this? And then your immune system will see it, learn what it looks like, learn how to fight it off, and then the next time you get infected with a real deal, your body recognizes it and knows how to fight it off. And that is the end of your free trial of what it would be like if I decided to become a lecturer someday. I hope some of that made sense. I rambled a lot because, I had to study this stuff for tests. So there's a lot of big words I had to remember, and then I kind of had to remember what the definitions was so I can explain them while still remembering the whole sentence I was trying to say to you, and also focusing on trying to simplify it without making it entirely wrong. I hope I didn't babble too much and that this still made sense to you, and that you feel a little bit more informed. and willing to go get a vaccine, because I am gonna go get that COVID vaccine as soon as I can. I probably won't be getting it anytime soon because I'm not an at-risk group, which is a good thing, but I'm not a child, I'm not the elderly, I'm not a frontline worker, I'm not a healthcare professional, so I don't get to get the vaccine anytime soon. But I want it, I'm curious, and I want all of you to get it if you have the option to do so too. It is truly in your best interest, and all it's doing is telling your body, yo, this is what to look out for, so that when it sees it, it can get rid of it instead of being all surprised and then losing the little war that happens. So I hope you feel all informed with your little history lesson and microbiology lesson and immunology lesson and everything you got all bundled in one. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and as much as I enjoy this makeup look. Like, it turned out so much cuter than I thought it would, and I'm really happy with it. If you want to see what else I get up to, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. It would really help me because I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers this year. That is my goal, and every single one of your clicks helps. Also, if you like this video, more people are likely to see it, and then more people know how vaccines work, and then will end up getting the vaccine themselves. So it's for the greater good, really. But sass to one side, stay tuned for Friday's video. I'm going to be telling you a drama-filled story. I'm in the mood for a good story time video, potentially some tea spilling. I may or may not be talking about Glucose Guardians, so stay tuned for that. But then that is it for today, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye! My screen lags behind what I'm doing, so when I did this and then this, I could still see myself doing this when I was already doing this. And then when I was done, I could see myself going on the screen. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.